All right, hope you're all doing well. So, today I wish to challenge a very common notion, namely that the ancient religion of Israel was monotheistic. This is actually not true. The religion of ancient Israel was not monotheistic. And I intend to go over, albeit briefly, some of the evidence that we can share to prove that. But in order to go into this deeper, there's a lot of data to go through, and I simply can't do that in a brief video, but I will go over what I can. Now, part of the problem is that when it comes to reading the various names of God in the Old Testament, we almost, by an automatic cognitive process, make all the different names synonymous. So when we see Yahweh, Elohim, we believe that they're all referring to one divine being with different names. But in fact, it's very likely that some, if not all of these, were different gods. And let's go about proving that. Now, first, let's start with something that we're all probably pretty aware of, namely Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Quote, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Sounds monotheistic. It's actually not. And in part, it goes into how we interpret and translate the words for Lord and God here. But in order to understand that, let's look at a piece of archaeology. Here is an article on Kuntalit Adrut. This is a late 9th, early 8th century BC Israelite settlement. And what's interesting about this settlement is that it has a piece of pottery from a jar. The clay was identified to be from Jerusalem, and it contains early Hebrew script on it. And the early Hebrew script mentions multiple Yahwehs. A Yahweh that apparently has a consort named Asherah. Now, if anyone has read the Old Testament, they will know that Asherah is something mentioned in the Old Testament, although it's kind of an obscure term. Some people interpret that as a grove or perhaps a wooden beam. But in fact, it was a female goddess that was worshipped in Canaan. And this particular piece of Israelite pottery, the early Hebrew text says, Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah, and Yahweh of Taman and his Asherah. Okay, Samaria and Taman are obviously different places, so this seems to be suggesting that there are multiple Yahwehs, more than one Yahweh, right? Depending on the region where one lives. So if we take this piece of historical information from the 8th century to tell us something about Israelite religion, now let's look at Deuteronomy and translate this verse back. So where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." What's been translated as Lord is the personal name of God, Yahweh. And God is actually Elohim. So what this verse says is Yahweh, our Elohim, is one Yahweh. Again, that's Yahweh, our Elohim, is one Yahweh. Now, in context of this, what that verse is saying is not there is one God, but rather there is one Yahweh. And so what this is doing is unifying the multiple manifestations of Yahweh into one being. The verse is saying that, there's Yahweh in this region, Yahweh in that region, but this is actually all one Yahweh. This is a statement of unification for a being that has multiple manifestations and is worshipped regionally. That's all this statement is. It is not a statement on monotheism. Okay? A very important distinction. And let us keep this translation note in mind that in English, Yahweh is translated as Lord, and God can be a translation of El or Elohim, perhaps. Again, in this case, it's Elohim. And we, again, by an automatic cognitive process, we think that Lord and God are referring to the same being, but they're not. They're referring to, I can't say different beings, but there's a distinction here. Yahweh, our God who we worship, is one Yahweh. That's what this verse is saying. And we need to keep that translational distinction in mind. Now let's look at another verse in Deuteronomy, a very famous verse, who anyone who's familiar somewhat with this topic, is Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. And let's look at one particular translation. This is from the NIV. It says, quote, "When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the people according to the number of the sons of Israel." Now, the verse sounds strange because it paints this picture where you have the Most High, which is Elyon, okay? God, Most High, when he's dividing the nations, he's dividing them according to the number of Israelites. It sounds absurd. I mean, how can you have, the world divided according to the number of Israelites, and why would you even do this? Okay. Well, when you read other translations, we notice that they actually have something different. For example, this translation, the New Living Translation, and again, I'm just kind of reading these randomly, says that the nations were divided according to the number of his heavenly court. Well, sons of Israel appears to be referring to human beings. Okay, human beings on earth. Why does this other translation speak of a heavenly court? That speaks of heavenly beings, which seems to make more sense, right? I mean, if there were heavenly beings, them being divided according to the number of those makes more sense. But when we go to another verse, and this is perhaps the most accurate one, the English Standard Version says that the nations were divided according to the number of the sons of God. The sons of God. Now you might say that the sons of God can be metaphorically equivalent to the sons of Israel, but they can't, and I'll explain why. Remember, when we said God, we're usually referring to Elohim or El. There is a consistent pattern in the Old Testament where the sons of El or the sons of Elohim are always divine beings. There are always beings of heaven, whereas the sons of Yahweh are always human beings. So, for example, the king in Israel would be declared a son of Yahweh, or Israel itself would be declared a son of Yahweh. Okay. But the sons of Elyon, or the sons of Elohim, were always divine beings. Now, what this verse is saying is that the nations were divided according to the sons of God Most High. And one of the sons was Yahweh. Okay, we read in Deuteronomy 32:9, "For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance." Again, Lord, Yahweh. For Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance. So now let's put this together. What this verse is saying is that God Most High is distinct from Yahweh. Yahweh is the son of God Most High, and Israel has Yahweh as their Elohim. Other nations have another son of God as their Elohim. All right. This portrays a completely different structure to theology than what we typically have today among contemporary Christianity and even contemporary Judaism. Okay. This portrays a pantheon. Okay. A pantheon where you have El Elyon, God Most High, who is above, and then his sons, who are gods themselves, and chief amongst them is Yahweh. He is the chief son of God. He is in charge of them. Okay. Very different concept, and we see it in another passage. We see it in the first chapter of Job, where there is a divine council of the sons of God, the sons of, I believe it's Elohim again. The sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahweh. Again, Lord means Yahweh. They came to present themselves before Yahweh because Yahweh is the leader of the heavenly council. And Satan also came among them. Now that's interesting because what that tells us is that Satan is also a son of God. Okay, kind of a stark contrast there. And here you show that Yahweh and Satan are having a conversation, and Satan challenges Yahweh. He challenges whether his beloved servant Job will actually remain loyal to him in the face of adversity. So again, this reflects this picture we're seeing that there is a heavenly council of divine beings who are the sons of Elyon. Yahweh is a son of Elyon, and Yahweh is the head of this heavenly council. And again, interestingly, Satan is part of this heavenly council, and he appears to be some kind of divine agency that tests us in a pre-moral theological construct to see if we remain loyal to our Elohim against all odds. Now, you might be asking yourself, if this is correct, if we're not dealing with one being with multiple names, but in fact multiple names reflecting multiple beings, where you have El Elyon as the supreme being, and then these subordinate beings who are all under Yahweh. Well, how do we get to this point where these distinct beings became one? And the answer to that is a convergence of two historical events. And the first one being the reforms of Josiah. King Josiah, king of Judah, between 640 and 609 BC. So now we're talking a couple centuries after the dating of this piece of pottery. He set in a reform of the Jewish religion because he had found a book in the temple which eventually became identified with the book of Deuteronomy. And the story goes that there were all these Mosaic laws that the people weren't following, so he re-implemented them. Now, another interpretation of this is that Josiah made the reforms, and perhaps the book of Deuteronomy was invented to validate these reforms. That's a possible alternative. It's not the biblical one, but it's the possible one. Now, in this process, we see what we saw in Deuteronomy 6:4. We see the process where Yahweh is becoming unified. Okay, the multiple manifestations of Yahweh are becoming one. But what we're also seeing is that Yahweh is starting to appropriate characteristics of the supreme God, El Elyon. So what was normally attributed to El Elyon is now being attributed to Yahweh. And this is a very common phenomena in the history of religion where the younger deity begins to usurp and take over the older supreme deity. We find this in Mesopotamia, where Marduk overtakes Tiamat and his grandfather, supreme being. We see it in Canaan with the Ugaritic text, where they also believe in El Elyon. El Elyon has 70 sons. One of them is Baal. Baal is repeatedly portrayed in the Old Testament, that the cult of Baal is competing with the cult of Yahweh, and that Baal in the Ugaritic text overtakes El Elyon. And this is sort of what we're seeing here. Yahweh is beginning to overtake El Elyon. He's becoming abstracted such that Yahweh and El Elyon are becoming fused. Okay, so that's one particular movement in history that's occurring. Now, the other one, shortly after these reforms, Israel was conquered, first by Babylon, and then Babylon was conquered by the Persians, by Cyrus the Great. And again, we're not going to get too far into textual criticism, But Isaiah is often considered to be the work of three different authors. The first set, from approximately chapter 1 to chapter 40, is the prophet Isaiah. And then there's one or perhaps two additional authors. Now, this is what's referred to as second Isaiah, which is the author from approximately chapter 40 to chapter 54. Now, the significance of this is that this part of the book, excuse me, was written during the exile, while many Jewish intellectuals and people were in Persia. And the Persians were the ones who developed monotheism in the true sense of the word. Okay? Monotheism originates from Zoroastrianism. These Israelites who were captives in Persia were influenced by this monotheism, and this monotheism began to influence the writings of the author in 2nd Isaiah. Okay? So again, the two main convergence of events, if you will, although they're separate, they're not identical, they're not in the same time period. But we see initially is the reforms of Josiah, where you have the unification of Yahweh, and Yahweh is becoming the supreme being. He's becoming fused and abstracted. He's becoming fused with Elyon and abstracted, and you have now monotheism. Okay, so now Yahweh fused with Elyon is the only God. Okay, and so these old passages that portray or archaeology that portrays Yahweh as anthropomorphic or Yahweh as a son of El Elyon who is part of a divine council. This is no longer acceptable. And what we're seeing, what must have occurred, is that there was a scribal redaction, or perhaps multiple processes of scribal redactions, where the Old Testament was changed to fit the new theology, the new paradigm. Okay, and we see this. So again, in Deuteronomy 32a, where we see these different translations between sons of Israel, the heavenly court, and the sons of God, reflect different editions of the Old Testament that were written in different periods. Sons of Israel, which is also in the King James Version, stems from the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is the Tanakh, or what we Christians call the Old Testament in Rabbinic Judaism. Okay, this is part of their canon. Okay, this is what they say the Tanakh or the Old Testament is. Okay, this is how they interpret it. But the Masoretic text was compiled somewhere between the 7th and 10th centuries AD, okay, or Common Era. This is this is a later text. It's not necessarily reflecting the most ancient rendering of the text itself. And in fact, when we read in the English Standard Version, where it refers to sons of God, we find that rendering in Qumran. Okay? Remember, the community in Qumran that left us the Qumran scrolls were contemporaries of Jesus, if not writing those scrolls maybe slightly before, maybe a century or so before Jesus lived. But if I'm not mistaken, the common consensus is that it was written contemporary to Jesus. Okay. That means this is the more archaic and original rendering, the sons of God, which means that between the 1st century, when the writers of Qumran wrote the script, and the 9th century, with the Masoretic text, there was a change. Okay? And this change reflects a theological revolution that was occurring in the Israelite religion. Now, it is the thesis of some academics that this reform was not successful. So when we think of Judaism, when we think of, rabbinic Judaism, what's referred to as rabbinic Judaism, Judaism was not a monolithic religion. There were many different groups. And the thesis of some academics is that this reform of Josiah And the monotheism of second Isaiah was not successful in being implemented throughout the entire Israelite population and throughout the entire Jewish diaspora. It failed. You still had Jews and Israelites who were following the older religion. In fact, they were following the older religion even up until the time of Jesus Christ. And we have evidence of this in the first century Jewish writer known as Philo. Philo was the leader of the Jewish community in Alexandria. He was a prolific writer. He was a contemporary of Jesus Christ. He lived between 30 BC and 50 AD, which means Jesus would have been crucified in his lifetime. Now, he is noted for his very, let's say, they would be described now as radical views of God, but they're not radical, okay? So, for example, he has this statement um, in describing the Logos, okay? The Logos is a Greek philosophical concept, but Philo is writing and basically translating Jewish concepts into Greek concepts. And so he's translating a Jewish concept as the Logos. And what's fascinating is that he describes the Logos as, quote, the second God. And this is from Questions and Answers on Genesis 2, verse 62. In an authentic text by a first century Jewish scholar and leader, he refers to a second God. And this should cause you to realize that perhaps our perception about Judaism as a monolithic, monotheistic religion is not correct. Now, the explanation here, the contemporary mainstream explanation, is that, well, Philo is perhaps a heretic and he's mixing Neoplatonism with Judaism. No. Philo is following the more archaic form of Israelite religion, where there is still a distinction between Yahweh and Elyon. Okay? And Yahweh, again, has multiple manifestations, he has multiple depictions, but generally speaking, Elyon, God Most High, is the far God. He is the God that's supreme and unknowable. Human beings interact with his divine intermediary, Yahweh, who is near and knowable, and as a divine intermediary communicates something of that supreme divinity to us. And he describes this divinity as the Logos, which again he calls the second God. Now, it's interesting because it's not mentioned here, but in one of his other works, he addresses how we can call the Logos God. And he makes this distinction between what he refers to, quote, the God and God, minus the article. Okay. The God is El Elyon. God is Yahweh. There's a distinction, okay, because God originates from the God. Okay. So even up until Jesus' time, we're talking centuries after Josiah's reform, centuries after the exile and the return of the Jews to Jerusalem, we have the vestiges and survivals of this more archaic Israelite religion. Now, this is very important for early Christology because one of the questions that plagues scholars is that how do you have Jesus as a divine figure arising in monotheistic Judaism, right? If Judaism was this monotheistic monolith, how was it that so soon, within the living memory of Jesus Christ, he was being worshipped as a divine figure? How do we explain this? Well, there is no adequate mainstream explanation, but in part it involves the theory that, well, you had Hellenistic or Greek elements being introduced into Judaism. Okay, that's the best theory they have. But you see, if everything that I've gone over is correct, and again, this is I mean, a lot of what I've gone over is the standard academic position that there were distinctions between Elyon, Elohim, and Yahweh, and that there was this, pantheon where Elyon was the supreme God, and the sons of God were underneath him, and Yahweh was the head. Okay, but if this structure exists, then we need not posit a Hellenistic influence. Judaism itself would have already had the theological structure so that Jesus would be identified as God within living memory. Okay? Remember that in the Old Testament, Yahweh manifests many times on earth. You have Yahweh manifesting as a man, you have Yahweh manifesting in the burning bush. Okay? There's a theory that part of this later redaction, the scribes inserted the angel of Yahweh, okay, because they were uncomfortable with the idea of Yahweh manifesting on earth as a human, because Yahweh was becoming, again, abstracted and becoming the supreme God who does not manifest, okay? But nonetheless, in the older version, Yahweh was manifesting on earth. So to go from that, right, again, if you're a first century Jew in Palestine, following the line of Philo, where you have this distinction between El Elyon and Yahweh. Yahweh is the son of El Elyon, and Yahweh is manifesting on earth. Is it hard to believe that Yahweh can incarnate? The answer is no. No, it's not. It's not hard to believe. In fact, it's very easy to believe. And this is exactly what has happened. It's why the New Testament contains titles such as Son of God, Son of Man. It refers to Jesus as Kyrios, Lord. Remember, Lord is synonymous with Yahweh. All right. Luke translates Deuteronomy 6:5, where it says, "And thou shalt love Yahweh thy God with all thy heart." It translates Yahweh as Lord in Luke, which means they identified these terms as synonymous. Okay. So when they refer to Jesus as Lord, okay, it's an application of a divine title. Okay. And again, this entire structure is all within Judaism already. It does not require a Hellenistic influence. That's why this is such an important topic. Now, I can't possibly go into all the data in the New Testament, but I'll go into one particular passage, Matthew 11:26 through 28, where there's an interesting passage that we cannot understand using the mainstream model of God, where Jesus says, quote, "Yes, Father, for such was your glorious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." Okay? Now, if we identify the Father as Yahweh, and Jesus, let's say, the Son as a man or a prophet, how does this make sense? I mean, did not Moses know Yahweh? Did not Moses see Yahweh? Did not other personages in the Old Testament see the angel of the Lord? Yes. So this verse makes no sense unless we interpret it in the more archaic model, where the Father is not Yahweh, the Father is El Elyon, God Most High, and the Son is Yahweh. The Son is Yahweh incarnate, who is the divine intermediary and son of El Elyon the Father. He knows El Elyon, and it is by him that El Elyon is communicated to us in some way. Okay. Now, Matthew was written, and this is known even or recognized even by textual scholars, and I'm not referring to those in a biblical seminary. I mean, textual scholars in secular universities. That Matthew was written by a Jewish scribe. Okay, he's a scribe in a true sense. He's someone who understands the Old Testament. And so he is reflecting this more archaic Israelite religion, okay? In the more archaic sense, with the distinction of Elyon and Yahweh. This passage makes sense, and it is in fact an affirmation of Jesus' divinity, okay? Again, we need not speculate and introduce Hellenistic influences here. This is entirely consistent within Judaism itself, okay? Now, again, there's a lot to be said here, but if you're interested in this topic, I would recommend this book, The Great Angel, A Study of Israel's Second God by Margaret Barker. Okay, Dr. Barker wrote this. This is a fantastic, very thorough look into this topic. She goes into evidence from the exile. She goes into evidence from early Jewish writers, from Targums, early Christians. I mean, she goes over a lot of material. And in my opinion, this proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Israel was not a monotheistic religion, that there was a polytheistic notion of the Godhead with a supreme high God, and that this theological structure survived into the first Christian generation, where it influenced the first generation of Christians in how they understood Jesus Christ. So that's all I have today. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, please share them. Take care.